Here, read this.
Woof.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to John Kay's Bookshop in Edinburgh. Just before I open up today, I thought I'd tell you about some books that I've read recently. Starting off with this, The Guga Hunters by Donald S. Murray. This is a bird book, but a bird book with a difference. Most bird books, the modern bird books at least, are very much concerned with the conservation of our dwindling bird populations. This one is a book dedicated to the tradition of killing and eating guga, which are basically juvenile gannets. It's a bizarre story. So it concerns the men of Ness, a population of fishermen from the Isle of Lewis, who have an annual tradition of boating out to the Isle of Sulasgia, where there is a gannet colony. Basically, the fishermen take their boat up to the geo, which is a strip of water that goes into the island like a teardrop, clambering up onto the rocks, hunting the guga by hand, killing them, and then plucking them on the windiest part of the island they can find, so that the feathers are all cleared, so that it ends up with this blizzard of feathers as they are plucking all of these guga. Obviously, time isn't on their side. They have to get this meat back to the island before it spoils. So what they do after they have this bizarre sort of pagan bit of the ceremony, where they burn off the remaining feathers, and Donald S. Murray describes it as this phoenix moment in the process, where the young guga is held up and briefly aflame. They pickle them in a salt pickle once they are plucked, and stack them in what's called a broch, like basically a cairn. There are photos in the book. You won't be able to see them in this light, I don't think. But it basically looks like a cairn of stones, but it is, in fact, thousands, up to 2,000 of salt pickled guga. Then, to get them off the island, they slide them down a chute back into the geo, and because they're so oily, the chute is basically lubricated by the plucked guga funneling down it. It's a bizarre story, wonderfully described by Donald S. Murray. Not so much a sort of typical bird book, as I say, but a kind of cultural history of a ritual connected to birds, with very strange twists and turns. So in 1954, when the Protection of Birds Act came in, the men of Ness were specifically exempted, as the only community in the UK who are exempted and allowed to continue to hunt wild birds, in their case, up to 2,000 gugas from Sulasgia. Now, partly this is because it was seen as a vital part of their annual diet. They would go to Sulasgia and hunt the guga when it was the off-season for fishing. But nowadays, they continue to do this. This is a practice that's carrying on to this day. And it's quite funny when Donald S. Murray comes to talk about how popular guga eating remains or not. There are descriptions of what it tastes like, which is, I think, memorably described as a salty counterpart to the smokes of hell by one sampler. There's a humorous recipe that he includes for guga, which reads something like: ingredients, 1 guga and 1 stone. Put both in a pot and boil. When the stone is fork soft, the guga is ready to eat. Murray, who grew up on the Isle of Lewis, is all for the tradition. This book is very much a defence of guga hunting. I'm not sure if I was convinced by his argument, much as I was entertained by the book. He says things like, he talks about how essential the tradition is. I'm not sure if traditions should be upheld for their own sake, especially when they involve killing animals. He says, the northern gannet population is totally stable and can withstand this 2,000 of its young removed every year. I'm not sure if that's a good enough reason to kill them either. They don't need culling, and I'm not sure, I can't remember quite when this was published. Was it mid-2000s? 2015. I'm not sure, since the recent outbreaks of avian flu, whether or not the northern gannet population is still stable. I know that they have historically been so, as they are very successful generalists who can put up with all kinds of hardships. But anyway, you don't really need to be convinced by his argument to enjoy the book. It's a fantastic read. It's really sort of wide-ranging. It's got first-hand accounts of the hunting itself, a wider cultural sweep, and he also includes not only his own poetry, but samples of Scots, Gaelic, and English poetry dedicated to the area and to the gannet. So I highly recommend that if that sounds like it's up your street. Next, speaking of poetry, is this curious book, Bloody Versicles, The Rhymes of Crime. This is edited by Jonathan Goodman, and as the name implies, it is a collection of rhymes inspired by criminality. Mostly murder, but he does also find space for sections on rhymes inspired by perjury, bigamy, and incest. Incest, which, as he mentions, having only become illegal in 1908, is the youngest crime represented in this collection. Goodman's anthology includes such classics of the genre as this. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. And alongside the likes of Lizzie Borden, Goodman collects poems like Thomas Hood's The Poacher, as a connection to the Guga hunters. Bill Blossom was a nice young man and drove the Berry coach, but bad companions were his bane and egged him on to poach. They taught him how to net the birds and how to noose the hare, and with a wiry terrier he often set a snare. Each shiny night the moon was bright to park, preserve and wood. He went and kept the game alive by killing all he could. Landowners who had rabbits swore that he had this demerit: give him an inch of warren, he would take a yard of ferret. It's a terrifically enjoyable collection, and Goodman's editorial notes and contextualizing sections in between make it all the more enjoyable. He talks about murderers with a faint detachment, a sort of mildly surprised and amused air that humans can be this depraved. Goodman shows an excellent eye for the funny detail, and it stretches beyond the poems themselves. I think it's in a footnote where he has a little segue about prison graffiti, which he accepts doesn't quite fit into the category of his anthology, but I'm so glad he includes this, recounting some graffiti that a prisoner had left that said, "My mother made me a homosexual," and underneath it another prisoner had wrote, "If I buy her the wool, will she make me one too?" So yeah, if you're in the mood for some morbid, funny, and bad taste rhymes, then I can recommend Bloody Versicles. Next up is Queen Macbeth by Val McDermid. This came out last year as part of the Darklands Tales series. It's a short novel about Gruoch, the historical figure who is best known to us as Lady Macbeth in Shakespeare's play. Now, this book is one that I have reviewed for my Substack, which I keep meaning to promote in one of these videos. I've set it up only in the last few months, and I've just really been enjoying writing book reviews and posting them on there. So if you fancy reading some reviews of mine of new-ish books, then I'll leave a link in the episode description box below, but please consider subscribing and you'll have reviews sent to your email address. I thought Queen Macbeth was awful, and I'll try not to repeat myself in case you do end up reading that review. It's one of those novels that for me fits into the category of Shakespeare tourism of the lamest kind, like Hamnet, something that purports to be the real story and huffily showing up what Shakespeare got wrong, correcting him in the manner of a very sort of forbearing schoolmaster. Suffice it to say that everything that Queen Macbeth gets right historically, like Gruoch's name, it finds three more things to get wrong. And its commitment to historical accuracy can be measured by the fact that it has Queen Macbeth on the cover, despite pointedly calling her Gruoch throughout. Val McDermid says, I've hung on to this name for the sake of convenience, but one suspects that marketability also had something to do with it. Another thing that's true of these sort of Shakespeare tourism books that want to finger wag at Shakespeare whilst piggybacking on the name recognition of his works. So while it's not really any improvement on historical accuracy over Shakespeare, neither is it a very entertaining or exciting novel. Macbeth and Queen Macbeth, Gruoch, are sort of sanitized into hard-done-by heroes, robbing them of really any of the colour or interest of the play, and it all comes off as a fairly sappy, solemn waste of time, to be frank. Not a book I can recommend. Moving on, we have Pandora's Box by Peter Biskind. This is a history of the so-called golden age of TV, spanning from The Sopranos through to the sort of Netflix boom and covering various shows in between, including The Wire, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, Mad Men, and Orange is the New Black. Biskind is the author of a book called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, a kind of modern classic account of the auteur movement in Hollywood, the rise of filmmakers like Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, and the collapse of the Hollywood studio system. I read that book, I think, when it came out, and I absolutely loved it. My love of movies was in its sort of first blush then, so it was the perfect book to read, and I have very fond memories of it. This book has made me feel a bit queasy about going back to it. Biskind writes about his subjects like they're all romantic outlaws heading into the West with their wild side up. And maybe that worked a bit better when he was writing about the likes of Dennis Hopper and auteurs who were, kind of risking their careers to make something different. It doesn't work so well when you're talking about producers who were turned down for a 40 million pilot at CBS and so made it at HBO for 20 million. And that's really the weakness of the book. We've moved from the ground level, people like the young Scorsese or Coppola building a career from the bottom, to the shit munchers at the top, basically, who are now the protagonists. There's mega producers who, like the Ryan Murphys, the guy who made Mad Men, people like that, who, they are interesting grotesques. There's wonderful portraits of these slimy characters, but they don't remotely suit the kind of bohemian romanticism with which Biskind writes about them. Taken as gossip, the book is enjoyable. There's a wonderful bit about David Chase, creator of Sopranos, and his mother, who is a very Livia Soprano-like character. People who are familiar with the show will know what I mean. And there's an account of him attending his wife's sister's funeral, who had died from a brain aneurysm. And his mother had been trying to contact him all weekend and was angry that he'd gone. And when he finally tells her the reason why he just suddenly had to go and attend this very sad affair, his mother's response was, "I told you, David, that girl was too smart." But the gossipy fun of the book doesn't redeem it from the fact that virtually every character is described as a kind of devil-may-care outcast. A typical example of someone who's a kind of mega producer who Biskind describes as hungering for controversy, and if none is available, she creates it for herself. As she puts it, "I have this deep-rooted fuck you nature. If she is driven by an impulse, it is trespassing, breaking boundaries, crossing over into alien territory, no-go zones. Belonging, aka tribalism, is her enemy." And then in the same sentence he tells us, "She was currently writing for Friends and Will and Grace." For me, that sums up the gulf between the book's tone and its content. The book sort of takes it as read that we have just lived through a golden age of TV. And by the time I got to the end of the book, I thought there actually hasn't been a golden age of TV. There was The Sopranos, and then that was the last time that an artistic kind of motive corresponded with a financial one. They made some money off The Sopranos and instantly just began to ape the broadcast and studio systems that these cable channels and streaming channels were supposedly out to dethrone. A mixed bag. If you're interested in the history of TV, I think you'll find lots to enjoy. Or if you just want some, top-notch gossip from the Hollywood swamp. Finally, I want to talk to you about some of the ghost stories of the master M.R. James. This collection is called Ghost Stories of an Antiquary. It contains probably his most famous story, "Oh, Whistle and I'll Come For You, My Lad." I'm currently writing something about ghost stories, which is why I'm revisiting James. And I think all I really want to talk about is two things that jumped out to me about James's stories. I'm a big fan. I highly recommend you read M.R. James. I think hopefully that goes without saying. But two things really jumped out to me. One is the unusual vigour of James's ghosts. They don't so much flicker across a hallway as see you and just start pelting towards you, often laughing at the top of their voice. And the second thing, which I'm sure is often commented about James, is the brilliant and kind of counterintuitive way that he makes his stories immediate. And that seems to be by placing as much distance as possible between the narrator and the happening. Typically, a narrator has heard a story, a ghost story, second or third hand, and then is relating it to the reader. The protagonist of that story are themselves separated from the horror by layers of perhaps textual distance. They might be discovering a book or a painting or a building, and they sort of stumble over some old tragedy that they don't quite sort of get to the bottom of. They just see little nasty corners of it. They get a horrible shock and they flee. And you would think that all of those sort of sedimentary layers between you and the scary thing would make it very detached and dull. Surely, it would make more sense to try and scare people in the present tense. But there is something about picking a loose thread and stumbling over something you shouldn't have seen and not quite glimpsing it fully that is just wonderfully creepy. So there you go. There's 5 quick, I hope quick. This seems like it's gone on a bit too long. Need to open the shop now, so I will end the video there. Hope you enjoyed. Please check out the Substack if you fancy reading some book reviews, and I'll see you very shortly. Thank you. Goodbye.